Hey everyone, just a real quick note before we get into this episode, describing my recent trip to Beirut. We started this podcast because we wanted to tell the stories that actually matter, to hear from voices that the world doesn't hear from enough, and to make a real impact on the ground. So that was the motivation to go back to Lebanon and talk with our friends at the NGO Ahla Fawda as they deliver humanitarian aid during a war. If you're interested in helping their efforts, check out the link in the description of this episode, or even consider sharing their work on your social media pages. This is a real way to help people, I can promise you that. If you're interested in learning how you can support their efforts, but you have questions, please reach out to us directly. Thank you. All right, good morning, everyone. This is Andrew Loftusness recording from Istanbul.
And good morning, everyone. This is Miloš recording from London. We've got a bit of a special episode for a number of reasons, but we wanted to revisit Lebanon. You yourself have essentially become our Lebanon correspondent in a sense. You recently came back from another trip to Lebanon. We've had a lot of chats about wanting to go back. We made it happen. You got there again, met up with where it all began with Imane Assaf, the very first person we interviewed on this program. Yeah, just talk us through your thoughts on all of this.
Yeah, it was a very powerful and very meaningful experience, and there's a lot I want to get into. But before we do all that, I just wanted to say thank you again very much to Imane and to your entire family, many of whom I met. I won't say people's names right now out of privacy concerns, but thank you all truly for your very generous hospitality during my trip.
Yeah, absolutely. When you visited Lebanon back in, I believe it was late February, right before the start of the current conflict between the US and Israel against Iran, which obviously had massive spillover effects into Lebanon. And we've covered Lebanon a lot of times since with other parties, with other organizations that are working there, usually via remote interview. We've tried to keep a sense of what is going on there by talking with Imane as often as possible, getting her thoughts from the ground. But it was important to us to sort of revisit Lebanon. And you, Andrew, you were very adamant about going back there.
Yeah, this was personally a very important trip. As you noted, our very first episode for this entire series was with Imane, interviewing her in person in Beirut. And then about 5 or 6 days, I think, after I left, the US and Israel started a war in Iran. And then that almost immediately spilled into Lebanon as well. So, we go to Beirut in February. We set up this relationship with Ahla Fawda, and then within a week, they are undertaking like full scale humanitarian aid operations in response to a major war in Lebanon. Israeli bombardment and ground invasion has displaced over 1 million people, about a fifth of the entire population. Most of them are in Beirut. Thousands of people have been killed, and the Ahla Fawda team, along with their partners at the We Deserve Better Foundation and others, have been in 24/7 response mode. And we have, of course, been in communication with Imane over these last 4 months, sharing some of her messages of her experiences with her team on the ground, which it has been an honor to do so, as well as a few other interviews with individuals involved in the humanitarian aid space in Lebanon. So with the war still going on, and we can talk about the so-called ceasefire here in a little bit, but I felt it was very important to go back, talk to Imane again, actually witness what her team is doing on the ground, take part in that hands-on, and most importantly, collect the stories of the volunteers from the Ahla Fawda team. Uh, Everyone is Lebanese. Many of them are displaced themselves, and that was incredible to meet them.
Definitely want to explore all the dynamics that you mentioned. Talk about the people that you've talked to. And again, I want to, I wasn't there myself, but I want to take this opportunity on behalf of this program, of the endeavor that we're trying to do. I want to thank all the people that you spoke to. Iman, thank you so much for helping setting this up, and to all the people that Andrew spoke to. It means a lot that you gave us your time and that you continue this work. So wanted to thank you on that. Give us a sense, Andrew, on what was your sense just flying into Beirut again? What changed on the ground? Was there a notable difference compared to the last time that you went?
There definitely was. One thing I'll note quickly is that, and I struggle with this myself. Should we say the war started or the war resumed, right? Because the
Yeah.
reality in the south of Lebanon is that uh, Israeli bombardment continued daily from the initial ceasefire agreement uh, between Israel and Hezbollah. Well, for over a year, right? Now, 48 hours after the start of the U.S.-Israeli war with Iran, it escalated significantly in terms of the bombardment of Beirut and the amount of people displaced and killed, and the amount of territory that the Israeli army occupied and is currently occupying in southern Lebanon. The atmosphere on the ground was tense when you spoke with people. Now, if you have visited a country that is at war before, then you know that the extent to which normal life continues, and I would say the extent to which people insist that normal life, normal, of course, being a relative term here, continues in extraordinary circumstances, really is quite astounding. This is especially the case, I would say, in Lebanon. But you have to keep in mind that people have, and the Israelis have been bombing the hell out of Beirut for the last 4 months. The south is destroyed, and there's hundreds of thousands of displaced people in the country, many of whom we ended up speaking to at the Eco Hub.
Hmm. And what was the change that you perceived in the Eco Hub itself? I'm assuming that things were completely different to the first time you went there.
Completely different. Um, So the Eco Hub is the center of Ahla Fawda's humanitarian aid operations. It's the heart and soul, I would say, actually, of their team's humanitarian efforts. So since the start of the war, they have been responsible on a daily basis for feeding thousands of people. What you can't really get a good sense of in the news and just from reading articles are what these places actually sound like. So, for example, at the Eco Hub, I kept hearing the word Janub again and again and again, which is the Arabic word for south.
أنا روانة من الفلوس عند النبطية.
أنا أبو علي سرحين، أنا عندنا قضاء النبطية، جنوب من جنوب.
Because before the gates opened for people to come in and start to receive food, clothing, hygiene kits, whatever the need might be, there were just crowds immediately from people who are dependent on the volunteers at Ahla Fawda. I didn't interview everyone that I spoke to. I just spoke with many people on the sides who were displaced from the south. It's a very hectic, in a good way, right? There's a lot happening and there's a lot of activity, but it's a very hectic environment. You can hear Israeli drones buzzing above the city and above the Eco Hub really all day.
And of the people you talked to, so you talked to a lot of people, but you also wanted to interview, as you mentioned, some of the volunteers who work with Ahla Fawda. And it should be said that we'll be releasing all of these interviews in an upcoming, production, and we'll notify everyone listening when that occurs. But in the meantime, can you set it up for who did you talk to? What kind of people were they like? And what did you gain from the conversations that you had with them?
Yeah, there's so much I could say. I'm just thinking of where to even begin. So I think the most important thing for people to understand is that many of the volunteers at Ahla Fawda are displaced themselves, right?
Mhm.
They're from, this is one of those things where you hear about the news always talks about a certain country in one way and then certain parts of a country in one way, like right, like Eastern Ukraine, Southern Lebanon, what have you. And it creates this image in the mind that makes it very easy to remove uh, the humanity from from the conversation,
Yeah.
right? Because it creates, again, this is not the case, but the tone that creates in international coverage is, oh well, that's just kind of how it is there, right? As opposed to a violent disruption of normal life. But many of, and then you talk to people from these places, and these are some of the most incredible people I've ever met. Right? They have, first off, this was almost no one's first time being displaced from uh, an Israeli war in their country. Right? So they have already endured more than most people will ever have to in their adult lives. And these are very young. Most of these volunteers were very young, right?
How young are
Uh,
we talking?
I mean, there's a lot of kids pitching in and doing their part around EcoHub, but the main volunteers doing the brunt of the work, a lot of them had very recently graduated college or were in college themselves. Some a bit younger, and so these are people who have already endured a great deal. They have lost their homes, family members have been killed, and they're still giving back. They're still
Mhm.
helping people. And it's difficult to convey. The reason why I'm not sure what to say right now is 'cause it's difficult to convey how impactful that is when you're actually talking to someone, right? Because I just feel like, you know, most people in the world who have like actual power or influence and or wealth are just making the world a worse place, right? And
Yeah.
then you have people who have, you know, lost everything essentially, and their response is, "Okay, how can I help?"
Yeah. Yeah,
Right?
I
And
believe.
I met a lot of people that you and I have been covering from Iman's diaries about the war. That was really cool for me personally. It was very meaningful. And it just kind of made the whole thing make make more sense. I mean, people were so generous. And one of the things that we want to cover on the show and that we have is the impact of the decision by Elon Musk and Doge to destroy USAID. And, everyone with like a very powerful mic in the media, especially on the podcast circuit, is talking about how that's all bullshit. There's no real ramifications from that.
Yeah.
Right. And then here we are talking to a young Lebanese woman who was displaced from the South and lost her scholarship for university because USAID was destroyed by a trillionaire
Yeah.
now, right?
Just
And
recently made his first trillion.
I just think that most people would be forced to change their worldview on many pressing issues if they spent a few hours actually in these countries talking to people who are actually on the receiving end of these decisions that for you are just a headline or a reel while you're scrolling.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I mentioned earlier, it looks at the moment like, talking about decisions made by leaders elsewhere. I mean, as you said, the war resumed back in February, and it looks now like there are efforts made by the United States and Iran bring this to some form of a close, of a cessation of hostilities, with the inclusion of cessation of hostilities in Lebanon. What was your sense then of how people thought of this ceasefire talk, these announcements that the ceasefire was going to happen, hopefully anytime soon?
So, two things. One, it's important to understand that the Israelis have violated every single ceasefire agreement since the post October 7th wars have started across the region. So, there's a so called ceasefire in Gaza. There have been not only daily bombings since, but Israeli army is expanding its occupation of territory in Gaza on the ground. That's a fact. Netanyahu himself publicly confirmed that they are aiming to occupy 70% of territory in Gaza, at least for now. When the ceasefire deal was announced, Israeli forces had occupied 53%, and they're now up to 60%, going to 70. And again, those numbers are coming from Netanyahu himself, and we'll include links for that in the description. We've talked previously about the so-called ceasefire in Lebanon, when in fact there have been daily bombardments, and Israel had continued to occupy territory in southern Lebanon during that ceasefire as well, right? And this is before that major escalation and invasion of the last 4 months. The same could be said of Syria. So I say all that to say, from the perspective of people in Lebanon, they know how things work, right? So let's answer that question from the perspective of the many people that I spoke to, or just listened as they spoke to each other. So the deal overall is good news, right? Implementation is one thing, but the deal is good news. It's certainly at least better than the alternative. But then, a lot of the things I heard were the deal, this was a few days ago now, but the deal is not supposed to officially go into effect until Friday. So everyone is saying, well, even if there is a real ceasefire, and there almost certainly won't be, they, meaning the Israelis, are going to be as aggressive as possible for the next 5 days. The Israelis bombed Beirut during this trip, like right before the deal was announced, right? That easily could have derailed the entire negotiation. And that's not a coincidence. That easily could have derailed the whole thing, but it was bombed that very same day. Very intense fighting is continuing as we speak in southern Lebanon right now. The timing of this trip was very interesting because, and Imane herself made a couple of jokes about this, but the war starts like very shortly after the first visit, and then I arrived this time, and very shortly after that, there's the announcement of this so-called peace agreement, or memorandum of understanding. And thousands of people still show up to the Eco Hub to receive aid. And then after the deal is announced, people announce that they're going home, or they're going to try and go home. But one, fighting is still continuing, is a surprise to no one on the ground. And two, the Israeli army is still occupying at least all the territory that they were before the announcement of the deal. So not only are these people's homes and cities destroyed, but they can't go back because there's an occupying army on their land. But what I want people to understand is that people literally just wanted to go home. Nobody wants to be on assistance. Nobody wants to need help. People literally just wanted to go home and live a normal life. Like, people left the Eco Hub and got in their cars and at least attempted to drive back to the south. Now, it's basically impossible, right? Like, that's in the days leading up to this, the Israelis ordered the evacuations from the city of Tyre, which is, I'll note, one of the most ancient, continuously inhabited cities in the world. Yeah. I met a lot of people from Tyre and Nabatea in the south, and these are places that are either under occupation and or intense bombardment. I can promise you that what all these people have in common is that they just want to go home and live normal lives. So internationally, yes, there's this announcement of an agreement. It could be a good thing. More that's not necessarily what we focus on here, but in real life, on the ground right now, Ahla Fawda fed thousands of people that day, and they're probably getting ready to do that again right now
Hmm.
because there's not a peace agreement if an invading army is still occupying territory.
How is Iman and her team doing with regards to that prospect?
That's a good question. I would say that everyone is tired, and that's probably such a severe understatement. But
Yeah.
to use another country as an example, uh, on my second trip to Ukraine a couple of years ago, I noticed there was just this shift in the air as opposed to when the war first started to when it had been going on for a few years. And it's difficult to accurately describe it with words, but people were just tired, right? People just want to live normal lives. And I got that same sense in Beirut as well from talking to people. Now, at the same time, for this team, there was no question that they're going to step up every single day and do what has to be done. But they shouldn't have to be doing any of that.
Absolutely. And just to bring it back to the Echo Hub, what does the everyday now look like for the team there? What do the operations look like in terms of a direct aid response to what's going on at the moment?
Yeah, I appreciate that question because I really want to give people an idea of what is actually going on. So the best way I can describe it, I think, is an orchestra of organized chaos, and Iman is the conductor. Right.
Mhm.
So you have thousands of people in these dire circumstances show up, and you have this small, highly dedicated team of volunteers who are keeping the ship afloat entirely on their own. So practically what that looks like is at the Eco Hub, Ahla Fawda has a few different stations. They have their main office, which of course is the administrative hub of the whole operation. They have a kitchen area, right? Where hot food is being prepared, just a constant churn. They have a clothing station where people can get new clothes for their families. And they have another of other they have like a recycling operation. They have like a number of things going on, right? Both in terms of like immediate crisis response and some of the more, when a war happens, a society's other problems before the war don't go away. They continue
Mhm.
to get worse,
Yeah.
right? And so Ahla Fawda is also responding to that. But so what this actually looks like is that we got there in the morning. There were already families lined up outside, waiting for the gates to open. They come in. Everyone, it's highly organized. Everyone checks in and they register name, where are you from, some basic data collection. They receive a number that they then uh, they give to an Ahla Fawda volunteer, and then they receive the aid that they need, especially when it comes to food. Um, and really, everyone is doing their part. The other thing that I picked up on there was this very intense sense of community among the Ahla Fawda team, which was very, very meaningful to witness. It was really something that you could like feel in the air.
Mhm.
And of course, I was only there briefly. I only experienced and helped out with that, for that day, but it was it was very meaningful to see that.
You mentioned the food donations obviously being a big part of it, but where does the food come from, and how does that organized?
So there's a couple of different things going on. One, we were putting together aid packets that contained olive oil, rice, sugar, salt, maybe a few other things, but packets that people could bring home,
Right.
of course. I mean shelters, right? That they could bring to their shelters and cook. One thing that I noticed, there was a massive bag of sugar that had been imported from Ukraine. I mean, everything here is donor dependent, and we'll do this for as long as we have to. We'll link the Ahla Fawda page in the description. But the people doing the real work and sweating on the ground are volunteers, and their work is enabled by people making private donations. And then you also have the hot food portion of the operation. People will see this in the interviews that we post, but it's basically like a large outdoor open air kitchen, so to speak, right, with massive pots going of delicious Lebanese food being prepared for the families.
And did you get a glimpse of the shelters that you mentioned? Like, what are the living conditions like for the displaced people?
Good question. I did not see that myself. So many of these families are living in schools, and I spoke with Imane about this. There were a lot of sensitivities that we had to take into account, respecting people's privacy and also just basic dignity. Right, people are
Yeah.
trying to get by to the extent that they can in these conditions. But
And
there's a lot.
by schools, you mean schools have been adapted to become makeshift shelters?
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. And so there's an enormous amount of food being distributed on site. And there's also a great deal that the team then goes out and delivers to numerous shelters across Beirut.
Well, listen, Andrew, thanks for this debrief. We kept in touch, obviously, you and I, but I've obviously learnt a lot from you talking to us about all of this. And I hope that people listening also get a better sense for the reality on the ground in Lebanon, in Beirut specifically. But obviously, this is not a one and done. We've got a lot of things coming out related to your trip. Do you want to give us a sense of what listeners can expect over the next couple of weeks regarding this Lebanon trip?
Yeah. So our goal, as listeners know, is to tell the human story behind the headlines. And overall, that's the main reason we wanted to do this trip. And we intend to do that. So over the next several days, we are going to release a couple of different interviews. We spoke with Imane again. I had the honor of interviewing a number of the volunteers. We're going to do a couple of different things with that. We're putting a short documentary together right now to hopefully better convey the things that we were talking about here. But the real intention with that is to quite literally provide a platform for the voices of these volunteers. So we will let people hear from them themselves. We'll do that both in a video format as well as a follow-on episode that we'll put here on Spotify and Apple Podcast, featuring just maybe a little bit of context that we'll provide, but featuring just the interviews of the Lebanese volunteers that we spoke with.
So make sure to stay tuned for all of that coming out. It's been great getting your debrief, Andrew. And as I mentioned, everyone, please tune back in and, you know what to expect next. Don't forget, we're going to be linking out all of the resources that we mentioned here today, including all the donation links to Ahla Fawda. Please keep donating. As Andrew said, these are individuals who are quite literally putting their lives to the side in order to help others, and they deserve all the help they can get. So thank you so much for listening to this week's St. Martin's Cloak episode. Today is June 18th, 2026. Thank you all for listening, and take care.